Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to be venturing back to the middle of nowhere. So I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was driving on the back roads, on the edge of the city limits. It was dark, there was no lighting at all. A few rest stops here and there, and I was meeting a woman off Craigslist, and already feeling a wee bit nervous. I was driving pretty fast, with no other cars in sight, when out of nowhere, I see a guy running across the road. He was already almost right in front of my car. It looked like he was getting chased by another guy who I didn't see until I swerved to avoid the first one while braking hard. My car went kind of sideways and hit the second guy pretty fierce, not at full speed though, and I heard a loud thud, but didn't actually see him get hit. My car ended up on the side of the road. The first guy seems to have kept running out of sight, as he wasn't there when I got out. This was a red flag, but I had just hit someone and was worried that I had offed them. I was all shaky and had that sinking feeling in my stomach. I ran towards a guy who was on the floor breathing heavily. Thank goodness he was alive. I asked if he was okay. He didn't respond. He just kept breathing really hard. Then I took out my phone to call 911. Just as I was typing in the number, that's when I heard him say, "No, don't call anyone. Don't call the cops." He said it pretty alarmed, so I just looked over at him with my phone in hand, flash on, and I asked him if he could stand. He got up slowly with a slight limp. With my light shining on him, I could see his clothes were all tattered, and he was wearing 2 layers of clothes with a jacket, now torn at the arms. He had blood on his arms from where I guess he landed on the ground. He said, "I'm fine. Do you have any cigarettes?" Yeah, sure man. Let me go get them." I had a pack in my glove box since forever. I was an occasional smoker and only smoked with my co-worker. Not in a while. We walked over to the car. I get the cigarettes, handed them to him, and I put my phone to charge. The car was still on. As I did, he asked for a lighter, and I said, "Hold on, let me look for it." While lighting his cigarette, that's when I asked him, "Who was the other guy?" He said, "Someone stole my backpack from me while I was sleeping." Oh, okay. He was definitely homeless then. I felt so bad. I started pulling out my wallet. I wanted to give him all the money in my wallet out of guilt. He looked fine now, albeit the bloody scraped arms, as his breathing had gotten normal. While pulling out my wallet and asking, "You sure you don't want me to call an ambulance?" That's when I felt the sharpest pain rock my face. I saw blurry for a couple of seconds. I started stumbling, and my body felt like it was about to fall over. Dizzy. When I came to, I saw my car pulling away and driving off. He punched me and took off, and left me with a pretty bad headache. I stood there in shock for what seemed like an eternity. I reached for my phone out of instinct. Then I remembered I left it charging. Shit. I reached under my jacket to check if my gun was still on me. I felt relieved as I felt the cold metal of my Sig Sauer. Okay, good. At least I'm not out here defenseless. I kept walking down the road, endlessly, hoping to find someone. I was pissed off and scared, and a good few miles later I see some lights. As I get closer, I see it's one of those public restrooms. Well, nothing else in sight. There might be a payphone though. Now what do I see next? I couldn't believe my eyes. There's a car that looks just like mine parked right out front. I take a peek. The guy that took my car is asleep. Looks like he cleaned his arm off. No jacket. That moron. He could have kept driving, but I'm glad he didn't. I take out my gun and try to open the door. It's locked. I try all the doors. Locked. I didn't want to wake him up by banging on the car because I was afraid he was going to drive off. I looked over all the ground, and there was nothing to break the window. So I holster my gun, take off my jacket, and wrap it around my hand. I smash through it, glass spilling everywhere, and the guy jerks awake and starts fumbling around. All the while, I drop the jacket and rapidly unholster my gun. I'm pointing my gun right at his head and he says, "Please don't shoot me." Instead of saying sorry, he just says that shit. I tell him to get out and walk towards the wall with his back turned. So I back up as he complied. I tell him not to move and then ask him where my keys are. After I got my keys from him, I drove off, with glass all over the inside of my car. I never called the cops because I had hit him earlier, and then because I pulled a gun on him. I was scared and worried about the legality of it. Also, I had brought it from an arms list, but the seller never signed the bill of sale. Only I did. So I was sketched out about that as well. Last thing I need is them checking my gun after he tells them about it, and finding out the guy who sold it to me reported it as stolen. I probably would have been fine calling them, but I was tripping and never met the Craigslist chick. I went home. I spend weeks alone in the woods by myself, and I used to go on group camping trips about 2 weekends a month for 10 years. I was born into camping and love it. Most of my outings are trips to the Ocala National Forest in Florida and other state/national parks. Most odd occurrences are with other people and animals, and I've stumbled into neo-Nazi rallies and clan gatherings several times. Multiple interactions with the odd hunter and their tracking dogs. However, last year finally opened my eyes to the dangers of being alone. I was heading to my usual spot in Ocala, a free primitive campground next to a secondary creek, and noted a Department of Corrections bus. The officer there stopped me and briefly inquired about my reason for being there. I asked what was going on, because I was going to be camping in the area. He said a body was discovered by the road and was linked to a case in the area, and the prisoners were there to search the area. The case was being built for a local man linked to the murder. I left the scene and went home, rather than camping, thinking the entire time about last year, when I was alone in my tent and heard footsteps outside. Assuming it was a bear, I pulled the side of my handgun loud, just enough for it to be heard. But rather than an animal noise, it was the whispered hush of a man's voice, laughing. I think I may have avoided being part of that case. The man was arrested for something and then linked to a ton of the murders in the area, and he is still serving time in prison. I used to live in a part of Memphis, Tennessee, that was a little shaky. It was right on the edge of what some would call the ghetto, but also there was a nearby area that was pretty secluded and desolate, as I lived on the outskirts of the city, kind of near the industrial part near Raleigh, for anyone familiar. I was an 8-year-old boy when this happened, and my sister was 5 years my senior. The two of us went for walks on occasion. This time, we went to the back of the housing division, and further than we'd ever gone before. This area was pretty dirty, and desolate for such a city. Just train tracks and a nearby industrial facility. Lots of dry tang grass coming through spots in the railroad gravel. Lots of dusty crap people dumped illegally around the tracks. There used to be a pack of stray dogs that walked around my neighborhood. But other than that, no people or cars would really ever be seen out there. Not that far behind my neighborhood anyway. We were just walking along the tracks, talking, throwing rocks, when I saw some strange movement just beyond the tree line of this small wooded area, about 40 feet ahead, and on the left a bit. I told my sister to look as we walked a bit closer. We had made it about 10 to 15 feet away from the woodland area when we realized the movement was in fact a mime in the middle of nowhere, seemingly hidden amongst the trees and thick dead vines that adorned the edge of the wooded area. Painted face, black striped shirt with black pants. He had the exaggerated expressions of a mime too. His eyes got really wide as he seemed to start performing for us. He was kind of being way too into it. Maybe he was trying to attract us, perhaps entice us into the wooded area where he stood, or lurked for that matter. I honestly couldn't tell you much about him, as we ran away quickly. I do remember, however, that it was very hot outside that day, and his makeup was pretty dingy and gross, as were his clothes. I know this sounds pretty unbelievable, but I assure you, it happened. I sometimes wonder who the mime was. I'm sure he wasn't there to kidnap children, but who knows what would have happened if we'd have gone into that thicket. And why there? He was just simply insane, I think. His mind gone, which is far more creepy than any stranger I have read about. So, my wife and I backpack/hike a lot. The more remote the place, the better. In 2015, my wife and I were in the Bitterroot Wilderness in Montana. We had been out for 2 weeks on a 100-mile route, finding trails we kind of connected together on a few topo maps to make a loop. We had only seen one other person, Tom. We met him on our second day in, and his last day out. He told us that he hadn't seen or ran into anyone out there, so as far as we all knew, we were going to be alone out there. He told us hunting season was weeks away, but there might be scouts out, to be very careful with our food, where we eat, and our scent, because it's bear country, and he had seen a few, and even one with cubs. He also mentioned that he had heard cougars in the distance, but that we should be okay as long as we stick together. We camped together that night, and the next morning we thanked him for his company, all the information he had given us, and parted ways. For 2 weeks, we hiked, saw some cool vistas, swam, saw and heard wildlife, and all the stuff you'd expect to see in the backcountry. We didn't really think about Tom again after a few days out, and hadn't seen anyone. We took the thought of being alone for granted, and let our guard down. As far as other people were concerned, we were all alone out there. We were in our last few days out, winding the trip down, sauntering back to the trailhead, and just taking it all in. We found a nice flat tent site, made a fire, cooked some dinner, and hung our food bag and walked back to our tent for the night, and passed a good night's sleep. The next morning, as backpackers do, we break camp as early as possible, get some breakfast and coffee into us, but before we leave camp, I really needed to drop a deuce, so I venture away from the tent site to find a suitable spot. As I'm walking around, I find a place to dig my cat hole. I come up on a lumped up thing looking like a bush. I was not expecting to run into anyone out there, as we had only seen one other person early on, and no one else since. I wasn't paying attention. I was looking for somewhere to go, and not looking out for people. These two are in camo/blind type of wrap, and I didn't realize they were there. They didn't hear or realized that I walked up on them till the last damn minute when I was right on top of them, tripping over one of their legs. They scared the crap out of me, and I scared the crap out of them. When I hit the guy's leg, I startled him. He kind of jumped up, knocking their blind off for the big reveal. The guy that was on his knees had a penis in his hand, apparently blowing the other guy that is up against the tree. He's looking at me with a look of, "WTF? Who are you?" and "I'm caught." My sight is going back and forth from hunter, penis, hunter, hunter, penis, and the guy standing yells at me, "What are you doing, man?" They scramble, trying to stand up, the other one pulling his pants up, all while both fighting the blind that's wrapped in between them. Me, in disbelief on what just came up, just stood there for what felt like forever. I stumbled over my words to find an apology and blurt out, "Nothing guys, sorry, have fun," and turned back to my camp and almost ran. They yelled out to me to stop, but I didn't. It was the longest 200-yard sprint ever. I got back to my camp and my wife looked at me and instantly knew something had happened. She asked what was up. I told her to grab her stuff and we hurried out of there without a word. After about an hour of sprinting and hiking, we had to stop. I still hadn't taken a dump and I really had to go. So we took a spur trail to break, snack, and tell her what happened. She told me she was worried and that I had scared her. She was scared the whole time, thinking I'd been chased by a bear or cougar or something, and that it was after us. I told her it was nothing like that it was just two hunters hiding out blowing each other. We talked a bit about it, and she asked if I thought they were looking for us. I told her that they yelled at me, wanting to know what the hell I was doing, if we should just make it back to the car and leave. No, let's just wait them out, just in case they're at the trailhead waiting. Like I said, we'd been out for about 2 weeks now, and we have been making our way back, and are less than a day's hike from the trailhead at this point. So they must have gone out after being caught, right? After a while of talking it over, we kind of just chuckled it off and hiked on to the creek where we were going to camp for the next night. We made camp off trail in a nice outcrop with no incident. Next morning, we break camp, do our morning routine, and hike out to the trailhead. With that, we're not really thinking of the two hunters anymore. Well, as we get to the trailhead, we meet two ladies that had been prepping breakfast and now cleaning up. As we were walking to the parking lot, they chat up with the usual backcountry questions. How long have we been out there? How many miles did we do? Did we see any bears? What did we eat? Then amongst all the same, one lady offered up some food they had left over. As the other gal starts yelling, "Hey hubby, these two have been hiking up the same trail you and so were just out the other day on. But they were out for 2 weeks. Bring them some of that real food and juice." The hubby pokes his head out of their camper to say hi. Lo and behold, it was the hunter that was against the tree. His smile faded as quick as his face turned white, and then to an angry look when he realized who he was looking at. Then his buddy, the giver, turns the damn corner from the trailer to see me standing there. I feel the blood just drain from my body, and this guy's face turns from happy-go-lucky to disbelief and fear at the sight of me. The wife then asked if we happened on their husbands out there, as they were scouting for game yesterday. As I'm stumbling my words, they are darting to looks from me to themselves. Before I can say anything, my wife is answering, "Yes, we'd love some real food. No, we haven't seen anyone. You guys are the first we've seen in 2 weeks." The wife turns to the hunters and say, "You guys must have had real good hiding spots." I think both the hunters and me had a mini heart attack. One of the guys just gives a nod. My wife and I graciously take their pancakes and sausage. I can see both hunters quietly talking to each other, staring over at me every once in a while. I do my best to avoid the situation by picking up the car, while my wife is thanking the hunters' wives for the food. Both hunters with sidearms on their hips. They come up to me with a beer. The one that was on the tree kind of pushed it into my chest, asking if I'd seen anything out there. My heart freaking stopped. I again stumbled over my words. Other than some wild animals, nothing worth writing home about. Yeah, we didn't see much either, but we're really surprised you didn't hear us last night walk through your camp. Be careful. You never know what can happen out there in the middle of the woods. After a few seconds, the other one just smirks, and they turn to leave. Have a safe trip home. I wasn't sure what was going to happen in that moment, so I was readying myself for a fight. I was kind of shaken up as we were leaving the trailhead, and my wife asks if I was okay, and if they were the guys I'd seen. My reply was, yeah, what do you think, babe? And then asked what they said to me. I told her I thought I was going to have to fight them, but they just aggressively gave me a beer to buy my silence. I didn't mention the passive-aggressive threat that they made about walking through our camp. I guess hunters can really be dicks sometimes. This story took place in my parents' house. It's in the middle of nowhere, 2-kilometer radius of no other houses in the Black Forest. My mum and dad went out for a little partying with my uncle. Me, about 8, and my sister, about 6, had to stay home. No big deal. We were home alone often, as my parents went out a lot. 8-year-old me served some snacks, and me and my sis watched TV in my parents' bed, which was on the upper floor. We loved to watch TV together, like all kids. After an hour or two, we fell asleep, and the TV went off automatically. Fast forward to the middle of the night, and someone is yelling help from outside my window, which happened to be open. I woke up immediately, scared as hell, and I was completely awake at this point, but unsure if this was actually happening. About 20 seconds later, my sister asked me if I'd heard that, and my heart sank into my back. It was real. I told her yes, and that it sounded like Mum. She confirmed, both scared as hell and laying in my parents' bed, too scared to move, when another help came through. Fast as lightning, I ran to the window, leaving the safety of my bed. I shout out for my mum, but nobody responds, and my sister's asking me if my mum is outside and what she was doing there. And then again, someone screams for help. I shout as loudly as I could and ask if my mum is out there, but no one replies. I run back to my parents' bed, creeped out, scared, and my sister and I are crying a lot. The screams keep coming, and I told my sister to stay in bed as I begin running downstairs to grab the phone and to call my mum or dad. I collect myself, ran downstairs, flying to pick up the phone and get back to bed. My heart is beating out of my chest. I call my mum, for no answer, and my dad doesn't pick up either. No one answers the phone. I hadn't heard from them since they'd stepped out the door. The screams persist. My sister and I never had the closest of relationships, but at this moment we were stuck together, and we were protecting each other and the house. We fell asleep in each other's arms, crying. Fast forward to the next morning of 8 a.m. We woke up and nobody was in the bed. Still scared, we walked down the stairs looking for our parents, but they weren't home. I told my sister to lay on the couch while I looked out the window, and I went to the kitchen window to look out to see if there was a trail of blood or something, but nothing. I ran to my sister and we waited on the couch to get a sign of my parents, and we didn't say anything. At 9 a.m, they opened the door, completely exhausted, telling us there'd been a car accident in the night around the same time we heard the help screams. They couldn't answer their phones because the batteries had drained. My sister started to tell them what happened, and I already knew they wouldn't believe us. I swear that it really happened, and that it's 100% true, but to this day they still think we made it up. I hope the person screaming for help was okay. I went to Moonville when I was in college in Nelsonville. We decided at around 10 p.m. to go and search for this tunnel, and arrived at about 10:45. Unaware of the parking lot and bridge that led right to it, we parked a few miles down the road, on an old railroad track and path. Our friend promised he knew the way from there, and we followed the walking path that just stops at a very steep embankment in almost 90 degrees. We all climb down and then come to Raccoon Creek and cross a shallow part. We wandered around for a bit, roughly till midnight, trying to find the tunnel and anything particularly paranormal or out of the ordinary, when all of a sudden we're in a canyon type deal, and everything in the middle of it is dead. Trees, birds, insects, nothing was living. Animal corpses covered the canyon thing. One end was a cliff about 35 feet down, and I'm not sure what was there. When we found our way out of the canyon, it was like we just exited a different world. Everything was living again, and you could hear the birds. Thinking to ourselves, we thought we had only spent 30 minutes in there, so we checked our phones, which were our flashlights, and almost dead. It was 3 a.m. Knowing this was the witching hour, we all started to freak out a bit, knowing there were cults and sacrificial rituals being performed out in the woods. Not knowing where we were, as we were trying to use the maps on our phones. There was no service though, so it wasn't much help. But they started to die one by one, until we get to the last bit of battery on the last phone, and we find the one-lane gravel road and get to our vehicles and get the hell out of there. Since then, I have only been back once, and it was in the daytime after finding out about the bridge. Definitely one of the more creepy experiences I've had down there, and I haven't been back to that spot since. I love caving. Absolutely love it. I even joined a caving club. They send you an information pack once a month about featured cave tours. 1 month, they sent out a packet containing a 7-8 hour wild man caving tour. I've been on wild man cave tours before. They're not too difficult, maybe some rappelling or mid-climbing, but nothing over an hour. This one had a real danger climb. Too much to the right and you get stuck. Slip too far and you can fall in a hole. Getting rescued in a deep cave is basically impossible. There were 5 of us, 3 tour guides, me and another person. About halfway through the cave, they let us rest on this off-shallow ridge thing that was right next to the biggest drop-off in the cave. The guides told us how with the larger groups they did the typical total darkness and had everyone turn off their headlamps and just look around. When he motioned us to follow suit, we did. And after about 30 seconds there was this sound. It honestly sounded like footsteps, and then falling rocks, and finally a screech. Immediately the head guide flipped on his headlamp and looked at us with a panicked glint. I think he thought one of us had fallen or jumped off the cliff. He turned to the other 2 guides and asked if they'd heard it. They did, but couldn't explain it. They hadn't moved, and we were all still there. He radioed to the surface and asked if anyone on the normal tours was missing. This was about 3 hours away from the start of the Wild Man Path, and without our headlamps, it was literally like staring into a wall of black. There was no way an experienced or an inexperienced caver would have made it this far. The guides asked us if we wanted to continue with the experience and would understand and refund us if we decided not to. We went along and eventually completed the tour. Everything else went perfectly normal, but I don't know what that could have been. It wasn't animal footsteps, and that screech was blood-chilling. I am very close with my boyfriend's 7-year-old son, and last Saturday, I took him out to one of our local parks to go sledding. There is a dedicated sled hill, and there are tons of families that use it in the winter, which is actually a wide dam that goes across the park by the lake. I should explain there is also a bike/walking path around the entire perimeter of the park that actually goes around the top of the dam and leads to either a main road sidewalk or curves back down to continue the path at the bottom of the other side of the hill. We got there just between 3 p.m. and had a blast all afternoon, sledding and venturing out on the frozen lake. It was a fairly busy day at the park, but around 5:30 it starts to get dark, so the temperature was dropping and people started to go home for dinner. None of these things fazed my little man, because less people meant free reign of the hill to claim better sledding territory. While we were playing, I noticed a man walking along the path at the top of the hill, but didn't think much of it because there was still one group sledding. I did watch him though, because I thought it was a little odd to be taking a walk in the dark alone, with no dog or anything, when it's pretty cold, and I also felt he probably wasn't a park employee doing a safety round, because it wasn't late enough for them to be out, and they usually are in warm vehicles. So a little weird, but he just walked the path with his head down, and when I saw him pass totally, I let us continue sledding. When I got us to the top of the hill, I looked to the bottom of the other side, and saw him walking along the path there. I brushed the weird vibe off to me just being paranoid about serial killers and people who take people and the like. I genuinely did not even notice the other group leave because of how engrossed we were in our little racing competitions. I also didn't have my phone out, much because I didn't want the cold to drain the battery faster, but going to where I was from when I made the call to my boyfriend. I think I saw the guy again around 6:30. I was at the bottom yelling taunts up to the kid that he couldn't surpass the distance I had gone, when I saw the man walking again, right in my boyfriend's son's direction. The height, coat color, and demeanor of this guy were all the same, but other than that, I couldn't be 100% sure it was the same person. I looked down and realized how dark it was, how far away my car in the parking lot was, and how very much alone we were. The only other people near to us were maybe 3 people still out in their ice fishing huts about a half-mile away on the lake. I yelled, "Hurry up," as playfully as I could. The kid sledded down and the guy was passing by the same way he did before. At that point, I was very uneasy and told my little buddy it was probably time to go. He insisted I go up one more time to see if I could beat his distance. This kid had been waiting forever for this sledding day and was having so much fun. So I quickly got up the hill and got ready to sled down. The guy was to my left now, a good distance away, and looked like he was just going to walk the same path. I started to sled down while keeping my head turned towards him. He was almost at the main sidewalk, when all of a sudden, I watched him turn his head diagonally down the hill towards us, fast. He was making a beeline for right where we were. I was scared shitless. I hit the bottom of the hill, stood up, and ran over towards the direction of the parking lot in front of us. My boyfriend's son was half focused on the fact that I didn't let him sled down or ride the full distance, and half focused on finding his water bottle before we left, which was somewhere on the ground in the snow. I didn't want to scare him, but I said, "Leave it, we need to leave, just leave it." The guy was approaching, heading down, and one hand in his coat pocket as we were flat out retreating. It didn't feel dangerous enough to break out into a run. Plus my car was at the back of the lot, and the ground was quite slick. Or to call 911, but I got scared enough that I felt a rush of adrenaline and shoved the kid, still complaining about the bottle, behind me. Pulled out my phone and called my boyfriend, who I'd prayed had gotten off work, because I didn't even comprehend the time until later, about 6:45. He answered and I loudly said, "Hey bud, Dad's on the phone. Yeah, we're leaving the park. What would you like me to pick up for dinner?" I was very afraid this guy was going to pull out a gun or a knife and try to make us go somewhere else, and I knew a phone call probably wouldn't intimidate someone who really wants to hurt you. But it was what my hyped up, scared self decided to do. I went on to ask my boyfriend what time he got off work, even though I knew full well exactly when he got off, and other questions that may tip him off that something was going on. He just answered them as if I were an idiot, and as he talked to me, the guy passed us very closely. He was tall and had a hood on, but I could see his face and glasses. There was so much free open space around us, and he walked so close to me that his coat nearly brushed me, and the fog from my breath touched him. He kept his hands in his pocket the whole time. I am 24 years old and 5'1", and didn't even have my pepper spray on me because my purse was in my car. Thankfully, he just kept going, did not look back, and disappeared behind a truck in the parking lot. Very quietly, I whispered to my boyfriend, who was getting annoyed with the random lines of conversation, "Will you just stay on the phone with me?" He paused for a minute and asked, "Are you scared? What's going on?" I quickly explained it and pulled my protesting kid along to my car, where I shoved him in, shoved the sleds in, and got the hell out of there. I think there's something in your brain that makes you want to believe a bad situation isn't happening. I kept trying to minimize everything as it was happening, probably to keep myself from panicking. Now, I just keep thinking about how creepy it was, that he came back after everyone had left, and seemingly made a decision to turn back around and rush down the hill towards a woman and a child who were all alone in a dark park. Even if he didn't have bad intentions at all, I'm sure he could tell I was scared by the way I reacted to everything he did. He was either a creep or really lacked awareness in what he was doing. From now on, we go home when we see the last few people go home, and it starts to get dark. My father owns a large property in rural Australia. About 10 years ago, he had a horse die out in one of the paddocks right next to thick scrubs that surrounds a river running through his property. He dragged the horse with a tractor under a tree and covered it with a heap of branches, intent on burning it later. He forgot about the horse, and it was left there to rot, and it's nothing but a pile of bones now. We remembered this happened 10 years ago, and it's an old, dried-out horse skeleton completely covered by sticks, leaves, and branches. You wouldn't even be able to see it. When 2 weeks ago, Dad went to check out the paddock, and he noticed something strange. Something, or someone, had taken the horse skull and a lot of the larger leg bones and stacked them up in a pile closer to the scrub, almost about 50 meters away from where it originally was. What could it have been? There haven't been any people out there as far as he knows of. Scavengers like foxes wouldn't be interested in a pile of old bones, and even if they were, they couldn't drag heavy bones and stack them in a neat pile. It's a total mystery. When I was 13, my parents and I took a trip to Yellowstone National Park. While hiking a trail, we heard a huge crash and a loud scream. "Watch out!" were the words yelled from someone not in sight on the trail ahead. Hundreds of buffalo appeared crashing through the trees coming towards us. Executing our natural fight or flight response to this dismal turn of events, we ran as fast as we could through the woods. I tripped at one point and remember screaming out to my mother, who was already there to help me out. My father yelled at us to follow him as he started running up the hill on the other side of the path. 5 seconds later, we saw the herd of buffalo passing us. Turns out if you ever are being chased by a herd of buffalo, you should run up a hill, because the herd will naturally go downhill. We went to a diner right after that for lunch, and I ordered a buffalo burger, and it gave me a sense of victory. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. I always do love me some middle-of-nowhere experiences. If you did as well, please don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment expressing your thoughts. That's always something super chill to do. If you're new here and liked what you heard, feel free to subscribe and press the bell icon to be updated every time I post every night. If there's a story that you would perhaps like to share and have read on the channel, all you need to do is drop it to my email or submit it to my Reddit. Either are fine. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.